recording this a little bit after our regular service today because I don't know who was here this morning because I missed church because I commuted from Tampa, Florida to church this morning, so I don't know what everybody else's excuse was. So I drove and flew 1,100 miles to be here this morning, and I don't want to medal for that or anything like that. So today I'm going to talk a little bit, kind of catch up on some things since I've been gone a lot lately, and I'll go into some things more detail next Sunday. But I'm going to call this anti-you-know-what, because there are certain things you just can't say anymore. We talk a lot each week here about the convergence of events. These things are going to unfold in the 70th week and before, and how they're all converging and getting set up to be ultimately fulfilled. And the ultimate culmination will be the return of Jesus Christ to set up his millennial kingdom. Just a little humorous one. Somebody posted this on my Facebook page the other day. Atheism, intelligent design. You see the mechanical hand there on the other side? And then on the other, you have a hand that's equally complex, but that's just the result of coincidence and chance. And remember, there was a guy who wrote an article about the design of the hand. It appeared in a peer review journal, and they actually took it out. Now I'm going to play a few clips about the abortion issue, or a couple clips about the abortion issue. There was an interview with, just so we make sure that we know where some of these candidates stand on the issue, and this was Chuck Todd interviewing Hillary Clinton recently on Meet the Press, or as I think Hugh Hewitt calls it, Meet the Depressed. And here's what she had to say about abortion.
When or if does an unborn child have constitutional rights?
Well, under our laws currently, that is not something that exists. The unborn person doesn't have constitutional rights.
You had said you're for you think there are room for some restrictions. So is it fair to say that women don't always have a full right to choose?
Well, under Roe v. Wade, that is the law. And as I said, I support the reasoning and the outcome in Roe v. Wade.
Well, that's just really not an answer. And I mean, can you imagine 4 or 8 years of listening to non-answers to questions like that? Because, you know, she doesn't answer the question as to what her personal feelings are. She makes an appeal to the law. And then she says that in terms of restrictions, she would support Roe v. Wade because that's the law. But my question is as Roe v. Wade has been applied over the last 43 years, has there been any restriction that's really been allowed to be put in place that's not been overturned later by a court somewhere? So to say that Roe v. Wade allows this is just really a non-answer. But listen, she wants to bring everybody in line. I'm going to play this clip as often as I need to. This is Hillary Clinton speaking almost exactly 1 year ago at the Women in the World Conference, and this is what she said.
Rights have to exist in practice, not just on paper. Laws have to be backed up with resources and political will. And deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed.
And she means they have to be changed. We will force you. I talked a little bit about that last week when I talked about end-time fascism, about how they're going to try to bring everybody into conformity of a certain way of thinking and acting. And this is the type of person that's running for president on one side of the aisle in our election. This was an interesting tweet. You know, Twitter, the digital world is interesting because what you do in the digital world, you will try to change it. You really can't unring the bell. When you put something out there, people capture it. And so this lady, her name is Diana Arellano, and she says, she describes herself in her Twitter account, unapologetic about abortion care and access and reproductive justice, tweets my own, and she identified herself at the time as working with Planned Parenthood. She had some position with Planned Parenthood. So when Hillary Clinton made that statement about the unborn, she not only got heat from the pro-life people, she got heat from the pro-abortion people. So this lady tweeted out, and she said this, Hillary Clinton further stigmatizes abortion. She calls a fetus an unborn child and calls for later term restrictions. Horror of horrors. I mean, that she would actually, so now Hillary Clinton, nobody likes her, I guess. And it was interesting, when she did the tweet, her status was manager of community engagement for Planned Parenthood. She put out the tweet, and what did she do? She attacked one of the icons of the political left that's pro-abortion, and so pretty soon her account said the manager of community engagement for Planned Parenthood disappeared from her Twitter account. So she was summarily dismissed, I guess, for having the temerity to actually do that. This is, and I apologize, I did this in hotel rooms late at night and on a plane, and I do not remember the source of this right off the top of my head. Somebody will probably find it. This talked about, oh, I know where it is. Now I know. The University of Toronto. This has been around for a couple of years. It's called the Washroom Inclusivity Project. So I guess this is the state of our culture, that we have to have inclusivity in every aspect, even in what were formerly private areas. Gender neutral washrooms. This is what they did at the University of Toronto. It's what they're doing in a lot of different places. Just listen to what it says here in this paragraph. There are 2 reasons why transgender people will use a gender neutral washroom. The first is that they do not identify as either male or female and are not comfortable entering gendered spaces. The second is that they identify as either male or female but fear the harassment and expulsion that might occur should they be misgendered by other washroom users. So you need to be careful out there. Don't be misgendering people. It's a very serious offense. The pay equity police, this is an editorial from the Wall Street Journal the other day. The pay equity police get new ammunition. And look at this. Be prepared to report on employees by 14 gender, race, or ethnicity groups within 12 pay bands. So if you have a business, you're going to have some additional reporting requirements. Now, I'm going to turn to the subject of, I'm not ready to play that yet, excuse me. Well, yes, I am. Okay, so this is a, let me start this over. This is a scene in Molenbeek in Belgium recently. This was the Paris, the person who planned the Paris attacks. This is his arrest. This happened, and you can see they kind of drag him out there and they put him in the car and they take him away. And this is a heavily Islamic area now. It's almost an area that's a no-go zone. And he was injured, and apparently he got a boo-boo during the arrest process. And he was, they didn't question him because he was hurt. 2 days later, they had the Paris bombing attacks. They asked him no questions about that. Now, there have been people in certain areas of the press that have put up things that, for example, there was in the press, they were talking about the Muslim immigrants that were coming to certain places. And in Italy, they said, well, that's not very nice to call them that, even though that's what they are. And that's what's causing all these terrorist attacks, is what we call them. The Gatestone Institute is an excellent organization. I would highly recommend that you look at what they talk about. I believe that the director, the chairman of the Gatestone Institute is John Bolton, the former UN ambassador. There is a new article up that was just up the other day called Europe, Suicide by Jihad. Listen to what it says here in the first part of this article. One of the organizers of the Paris bombing, Salim Abdel-Salam, Europe's most wanted terrorist criminal, was able to live peacefully in Molenbeek for 4 months until police decided to arrest him. So they knew where he was. He was arrested a couple hundred yards from his family home in Molenbeek. Belgian police knew exactly where he was, but did nothing until French authorities asked them to. After his arrest, he was treated as a petty criminal, not a jihadi terrorist. Police did not ask him anything concerning the jihadist networks with which he worked. Because he was hurt during police operation, officers who interrogated him were ordered to be gentle. The people who agreed to hide him for so long were not considered suspects and were not indicted. The Brussels jihadist attacks took place 2 days later. So how did they react in Belgium to this? This is the Gatestone Institute article continues. After the attacks, Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel denounced violent and cowardly acts and stressed his determination without saying what he intended to do. He did not speak of the necessity of changing the Belgian laws to make them any more effective. He did not mention any enemy. He never used words such as jihad or radical Islam. When the Muslim world jihadis started to kill, Europe's leaders wanted to believe that the attacks would take place in the Muslim world only. They thought that by not interfering with what European jihadis were planning, they would not risk jihadi attacks on European soil. There are 6 to 8 million Muslims in France and more than 30 million in Western Europe. Hundreds of jihadis are trained and ready to act anytime, any place. European intelligence services know that they want to make dirty bombs. Surveys show that tens of thousands of Muslims living in Europe approve of jihadi attacks in Europe. Millions of Muslims living in Europe keep silent, behave as if they see nothing and hear nothing, and protest only when they think they have to defend Islam. In most European countries, Islamophobia is considered a crime, and any criticism of Islam may be considered Islamophobic. People trying to warn Europe, such as Dutch Member of Parliament Geert Wilders, despite an apparently biased judge and forged documents against him, are now on trial. The other thing that they did too was, in Europe, the other thing they did was they blamed Israel because Israel had not reached peace with the Palestinians, so it was clearly the Jews' fault. And they never looked into the ideology that drives any of this. It's absolutely sheer insanity. In Europe's near future, the article continues, more people will bring candles, flowers, and songs to mourn victims. Another 2 or 3 jihadists will be arrested, but nothing will be done. And then the question is, if that's what's going on in Europe, is that going to happen here? This was in the Arizona Republic earlier this week. Is a new surge of migrants coming? We've had a couple surges already. I think that we have a major problem in the United States. And if you talk about a moratorium on this, you're considered a racist, a bigot, an Islamophobe, and all the things that they will do with you. And if they could, they would put you on trial, I think, like they have Geert Wilders on trial in Netherlands. This will be a big issue this week. I believe tomorrow there are oral arguments in the United States Supreme Court about the president's policy and whether it's legal. He's essentially wanting to give amnesty to everybody. The Congress has said no. He's insisting that he can go ahead. One lower court has said there's no way, this is unconstitutional, he cannot do that. He doesn't have the power. So it's a very important case. It probably won't be decided until June. Um, and it will have a huge impact, I think, on this fall's election and that type of thing. If I seem a little hesitant, I don't know what's coming up next. That's why. Um, the in the Middle East, there's an issue, and one of the issues that's coming up is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is under attack by ISIS. The kingdom of Saudi Arabia is very unstable. They have massive oil reserves. They are in severe cash trouble. They thought that they could flood the market with oil, and even though the price would go down, they would still make up for the shortfall in price by volume. But the problem was they completely collapsed the market, and they're severely hurting. There is a move afoot. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But the Saudi king, he went to Turkey. First time a Saudi king has gone to Turkey in ever, I believe. And so you have a couple of major players in the Sunni world trying to get along. Now, part of this is because Turkey, because of its actions and its bad actions in many areas, has isolated itself. So now they're reaching out to different countries in the region to try to get some ally support. So that's why they're reaching out to Israel right now. Monday or Tuesday in the the Wall Street Journal, Bret Stephens, who's a very good foreign policy writer, had a good article called Islam and the Radical West. In that article, he cited the Islamic publication called Inspire, which the most recent issue is called Assassination Operations. It's a very slick color, multicolor publication put out by jihadis, and it gives very detailed instructions on how to make suicide bombs and other bombs and to conduct assassination operations of different people that are opposed to Islam. In his article, Stephens mentioned this, and then he continued. But the influence of the Alakis of the world. Remember, Alaki was the radical Islamic American imam that I believe was killed in a missile strike in Yemen a couple of years ago. So this is what Bret says. But the influence of the Alakis of the world can't fully account for the mindset of these jihadists. They are also sons of the West. Education in the schools of multiculturalism, reared on the works of Noam Chomsky and perhaps Franz Fanon, consumers of a news diet heavy with reports of perfidy by American or British or Israeli soldiers. If Islamism is their ideological drug of choice, the political orthodoxies of the modern left are their gateway to it. Now, this is a very interesting article because this is something we've talked about a long time. And people have noted that there seems to be this unity of purpose between the political left in the world and Islam and radical Islam. They seem to be joined at the hip in many respects. And Bret, I think rightly, is making note of that. He goes on to say, quote, leave us with our religion, land, and nations, and mind your own internal affairs. The commander now Emir writes, save your economy, look after your concerns, for it is better than what you currently are. This isn't the language of turning a page. This isn't the language of Islam with its impressive tradition of conquest. It's the language of the progressive left, of what G. Kirkpatrick at the 1984 Republican Convention called the Blame America First crowd. It fits the left's views of the West as a perennial center and the rest of the world as its perpetual victim. And so I think Bret Stephens has hit on something here in that he ties the political left, the radical left and radical Islam, that at least for now, in many respects, they're sort of united and joined at the hip. Now, back to Saudi Arabia. This report, I believe yesterday in the New York Times, says what has happened in Congress is there has been legislation introduced that has pretty much bipartisan support throughout Congress, on both houses, to allow lawsuits to proceed against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia regarding 9/11. Saudi Arabia has said, if you do that, we're going to sell all of our treasury bonds that we hold. And Saudi Arabia is currently the third largest holder of treasury bonds in the world. There's somewhere around $750 million, no, $750 billion of treasury bonds. If they put those on the market, it'll collapse the market. It will have a major impact on our central bank and that type of thing. Now, the Saudis may just be blustering. They may not do it because it would have an economic impact on them if they drop all this stuff on the market, because it will drive the prices down. But anytime they're being, anytime somebody tries to hold them to account, they are going to push back. The unification, though, of what is believed in radical Islam and the left surfaces in many areas. One of those areas is the relation to Israel. This week, the campaign of Bernie Sanders had some. Now, Bernie Sanders is Jewish, and he had promoted a lady to his director of Jewish outreach operations in his campaign. Her name was, I believe, Simone Zimmerman from New York. And what people did when she got appointed was they went back and looked at what she had written in her Twitter account and her Facebook account. One of the things they found was a post from about a year ago in which she said this. Bibi Netanyahu, and somebody, it's now, of course, it's been deleted, but somebody did a nice thing, did a screen capture, so we know exactly what it was she thought. This Jewish agency reporting says that Bernie Sanders' new Jewish outreach director is outspoken critic of Israeli occupation. Now, I blocked out some of the bad words. I tried to block them all out, so I apologize if I didn't. But listen to what she said last year. Bibi Netanyahu is an arrogant, deceptive, cynical, manipulative blank. He is the embodiment of the ugliest natural hubris and tone deafness towards the international community. F you, Bibi, for daring to insist that you legitimately represent even a fraction of the Jews of this world, for your consistent fear-mongering, for pushing Israel in word and deed farther and farther away from the international community, and most importantly, for trying to derail a potentially historic diplomatic deal with Iran, and thus trying to distract the world from the fact that you sanctioned the murder of over 2,000 people this summer, that a brutal military occupation of millions more continues under your watch, and that you are spending time and money on ridiculous campaign opportunities like this instead of actually working to address the real needs of your people. Now, good for her, whereas Bernie Sanders, her boss for a very short time, said that it was 10,000 people had been killed in the Gaza invasion in 2014. Even the UN didn't support what Bernie Sanders said. But Bernie Sanders, can we be blunt, he's like most people on the left. He doesn't care about the truth. He cares about what makes him feel good. So he'll go out there and he'll rail against people who don't pay their fair share of taxes. His taxes were released last year. He paid an effective tax rate of, on his federal income tax return, of 13% on income that exceeded $200,000. That's not hypocritical in Bernie Sanders' world. And I suppose if he really wanted to pay more, he could write a check. The IRS will accept them. So back to Simone Zimmerman. She opposes Israel's occupation, wants Hillel, that's a very radical Jewish organization, to allow participation by groups that support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel, is against Jewish Federation funding for Israeli projects in the West Bank, and wrote favorably of the efforts of Jewish Voice for Peace, a pro-BDS group, and I may have misspoke about Hillel, I apologize for that, to get international corporations to stop profiting off human rights abuses. The hypocrisy of expecting feel-good social justice projects to offset, this is what she says, to offset millennials' deep outrage at the grave injustices committed by the Jewish state is almost too much to bear. She must be used to safe spaces, I guess. No public relations trick can save Israel's image. The problem isn't with public relations. The problem is nearly 50 years of occupation. The problem is rampant racism in Israeli society. The problem is attacks on human rights defenders by extremists and by the state. The problem of a Jewish establishment that ignores or the problem is a Jewish establishment that ignores or justifies all of this. The article continued. Now charged with reaching out to Jews and Jewish groups to try to corral support for the only Jewish candidate in the race for president, Zimmerman either may be a deeply flawed choice for the job or the perfect hire, depending on your political views and your analysis of Sanders' prospects among varying kinds of Jewish voters. He does not support the state of Israel in any way. Now, there has been a lot of talk over the last 2 weeks about the fact that the Palestinians are going to present a resolution to the United Nations, supposedly on Passover this week. I believe it's on the 22nd, or the day after Passover. I'm not sure exactly what day Passover is. And the UN resolution is going to condemn Israel for building in the settlements in the area that it controls. And here is a copy of the resolution that has appeared to be circulating through the channels at the UN. Somebody got a copy of it, posted it online, and essentially saying Israel has to stop the settlements, they have to tear down what they've built, and those people have to leave. Because, you know, in Israel, it's okay to have Palestinian Arabs and Jews living together, but in the West Bank, really Judea, biblical heartland, Judea and Samaria, they don't want a single Jew to live. It has to be completely Jew-free. And yet, to somebody like Bernie Sanders and Simone Zimmerman, this is considered, the Jews are the racists. It's insanity. And look, we're only going to see more and more of this, and I'll share a little passage of scripture here in just a moment to tie this in. So then the question became, what will the U.S. do now? A lot of reports that Obama wants to get some revenge on Netanyahu before he leaves office. So what are they going to do? So they went to the State Department spokesperson and they asked him what he had said, and he said this. Over.
The Palestinians say that they are going to introduce or get someone to introduce on their behalf a resolution condemning Israeli settlement activity at the UN, or they're going to introduce a resolution at the UN that would condemn Israeli settlement activity.
Right.
What's your position on that? Is this something that the United States would support or veto?
Well, we understand there is an early draft that the Palestinians have shared informally in New York. And I'm not going to comment on what is really an informal draft resolution. Nothing has been formally introduced or circulated at the Security Council, and nothing has been introduced by a Security Council member. Excuse me. So, I mean, I guess I would say that this is not an uncommon practice at the UN, but we just don't have any comment on, like I said, this is a very early stage.
What's an uncommon practice for the Palestinians to want to introduce
drafts to circulate like this at a very early stage, but there's been no formal draft offered.
Okay, so you don't have a position on a draft?
We don't, other than beyond our general position on settlements.
So that was a week ago Friday, on April the 8th, at the press briefing of the United States State Department. Well, that caused a bit of a firestorm because the Jerusalem Post reported it as the U.S. might support a UN resolution against West Bank settlements. And this was reported in a number of other places. But look, there's a political election going on. The Jewish vote is very important to both parties, really. And so move forward to Tuesday, and this is what he said at the briefing on Tuesday, April 12th.
One, yesterday you seemed to leave open the door to the idea of supporting a UN resolution that the Palestinians have are showing around New York. But you said, in response to one question, you said we might take it to the Security Council. Did you mean to leave that impression?
I can firmly shut that door. No, look, I mean, that was, I think, the second day in a row I'd gotten that question. Nothing's been thus far formally introduced or circulated at the Security Council. No, I get it, right.
Is the administration open to the idea of such a resolution that would condemn settlement activity? Or is that something you think should be left out of the Security Council?
I'm going to say that our position hasn't changed in terms of action on this issue at the UN Security Council.
Which means that you're opposed to it.
Opposed to it.
So they won't support it, but he seemed a little bit reluctant to actually come out and say that because he probably got in trouble last week. He's going to get in trouble again for saying that. And, these people that are spokespersons for the State Department and the White House, they, as I've suggested in the past, they must have to, this is not the usual spokesperson. I think the other person is away undergoing some kind of intensive therapy to kind of try to reorient him as a normal thinking human being, so he doesn't have to get up there, or they sent him, he was starting to get connected to reality. And so what they had to do is they had to send him away to kind of reprogram him so he could get up and say what he has to say. That's just my speculation. I have no proof of that other than the fact that they're lying all the time, and that's the thing. Caroline Glick has a good article. I won't read any quotes from it, but it was in the Friday Jerusalem Post, that really what we see in our election now, with the way that Hillary is, with the way that Bernie Sanders is, with the way that a lot of the Republican candidates are, this is Obama's real political legacy, because we have people who are not taking a strong stand for the support of Israel. Now, there was another UNESCO came out with, I have talked about this in the past, they protect world historical sites. And so when it comes to certain areas in Israel, they're very pro-Arab, pro-Muslim. For example, down at Hebron, they say we have to protect the Islamic heritage of that site. Well, it's where Abraham is buried. And by the way, not Ishmael, but Abraham and Isaac, and I believe Jacob, are buried there in the what's known as the tomb or the cave of the patriarchs. It is a Jewish site, but there's a mosque been built over it now, and since Abraham was the founder of the Muslims, or is part of their Muslim heritage, of course now it's a Muslim site. They do the same thing with the Temple Mount, which it's called the Temple Mount because there was a Jewish temple there. Now there's an Islamic shrine, the Dome of the Rock, there's the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and UNESCO is beside itself because they're very pro-Arab in the way they approach things. So they came out with a resolution about occupied Palestine, draft decision submitted by Algeria, Egypt, Lebanon, Morocco, Oman, Qatar, and Sudan. And they talk about different areas of Jerusalem and Hebron. You can find it online. It's in the UNESCO website, and it's also referenced in some of the Israeli press. And Netanyahu came out and roundly condemned this as just totally disconnected from reality, because essentially what they say is that what Israel is doing is terrible because they have no rights to any of this or no history associated with any of this. Look at, for example, some of their conclusions. Number 5, the UNESCO deeply deplores the failure of Israel, the occupying power, to cease the persistent excavations and works in East Jerusalem, particularly in and around the Old City, and reiterates its request to Israel, the occupying power, to prohibit all such works in conformity with its obligations under the provisions of relevant UNESCO conventions, resolutions, and decisions. They then move to a section, they have a section on Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram Al-Sharif, and its surroundings. They never refer to it as the Temple Mount. They never even hint that there was ever a Jewish presence there historically. So look at what they condemn. Now, look, what we know is that the Waqf, the Islamic authority that controls the Temple Mount, it's under the government of Jordan. One of the earlier Waqfs was the Hajjaman al-Husseini, who many people believe was an uncle of Yasser Arafat. He was very anti-Jewish. He went to Nazi Germany to work with Hitler in pogroms to eradicate the Jews from the world, not just in Europe, but also in the Middle East. So they're in control, and one of the things that they've done, if you've been to the Temple Mount recently, you will see that there's some skylights. Well, what they did was they went in and they excavated an underground mosque that my understanding is will accommodate somewhere in the order of 30,000 people. In doing so, they destroyed a lot of archaeological evidence on the Temple Mount. They just threw it in a dump. Now, there have been some artifacts discovered in that dump site that are quite significant and show that the Jews had a presence on the Temple Mount that predated any Islamic presence by over 1,000 years. So here is what they say here, another one of the things that they do. UNESCO strongly condemns the Israeli aggressions and illegal measures against the freedom of worship and Muslims' access to their holy site, Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram Al-Sharif, and requests Israel, the occupying power, to respect the historic status quo to immediately stop these measures. It sounds like the person that wrote this could be the new Jewish outreach coordinator for the Bernie Sanders campaign, now that I think about it. Firmly deplores the continuous storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram Al-Sharif, by the Israeli right-wing extremists. Now listen, what do? They go up there and they walk around and come out. That's all they do. And when they do that, they're subject to taunts, rocks being thrown at them, screaming, the whole time that they're up there. Jewish people who want to go up on the Temple Mount. And urges Israel, the occupying power, to take necessary measures to prevent provocative abuses that violate the sanctity and integrity of Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram Al-Sharif. They don't want Jews there. This is anti-Israel. This is, I think, a very prophetically significant thing, because we know that one of the characteristics of the end time, and I'll read you a verse or two here in a moment, is that they don't want this, the world, all nations will be gathered together against Jerusalem and Israel in the end times. And this is one of the major world governing organizations, the UN and its sub-organization, UNESCO. Here's number 16, calls on Israel, the occupying power, to stop the obstruction of the immediate execution of all of the 18 Hashemite restoration projects in and around Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram Al-Sharif. Now, are those restoration projects? No, they're construction projects that are designed in great part to remove any trace that Jews ever had anything to do with the Temple Mount. They're not restoration projects. Further deplores the construction of the so-called Kadim Center, a visitor center near the southern wall of the mosque, and the construction of the Strauss Building and the project of the elevator in Al-Barak Plaza, Western Wall Plaza, the Wailing Wall. They won't refer to it by its Jewish name. They just ignore it completely. Now, this probably would drive UNESCO crazy. This was in the Jerusalem Post yesterday or today. They didn't publish yesterday. Couple secretly weds atop Temple Mount. A Jewish couple went up on the Temple Mount and had a wedding ceremony performed surreptitiously so that they could get, and they got away with it. This will drive them crazy, because how dare the Jews go up there and actually engage in any kind of a religious ceremony. And look, as a Christian, if you go up there to try to pray on the Temple Mount, you're followed and you will be arrested and taken off immediately. Now, yesterday, the Israeli police arrested a Jew who was up there, and he uttered a phrase from the Torah. And he wasn't even praying. He said something about, "May God help me." And he was immediately arrested and taken away by the Israeli police. So there's no free speech up there. There's no free worship up there. And everybody is united against the Jews. This is a prophetic, significant event. Dexter Van Zyl had a great article in the Times of Israel the other day, making reference to the Christ at the Checkpoint Conference, which had this subtitle, "Challenging Evangelicals to Take Responsibility to Help Resolve the Conflicts in Israel-Palestine by Engaging with the Teaching of Jesus on the Kingdom of God." It was an anti-Israel conference, as it always is. And what Dexter Van Zyl does was, I think, is when Muslims occupy a land, they charge a tax to the Christians. It's called the jizya. The jizya tax is, you pay the tax. It's a very oppressive tax, but then you're sort of allowed to exist. You're allowed to still be a Christian, but there's a lot of things you can't do, but they won't do what ISIS is doing to a lot of Christians in the territory that it occupies. And so what he said was, there are statements that are made at Christ at the Checkpoint to satisfy the Palestinian Authority, who has people sitting in the front row of every one of those conferences to monitor what's going on. And so they paid the jizya tax to allow them to continue to exist in the Palestinian areas by making statements to support the Palestinians. So listen to this. The Christian mayor of Beit Jala, Nicola Kamas, paid the jizya when he told an audience of about 300 Westerners, down substantially from previous years, "Ladies and gentlemen, it makes no sense to fight the Islamic State of Abu Bakr Baghdadi while supporting the Jewish state of Netanyahu." Now, what was this supposed Christian mayor doing? He was saying that Netanyahu and al-Baghdadi are the same type of person morally. They're morally equivalent. This is nonsense, but this is what the left does. And the Christian left does it as bad as the secular left. There is an article in Gatestone Institute. I don't have any parts of it here, but you can look it up at gatestoneinstitute.org. I would highly recommend that you review that site with some regularity, because they deal with issues with a clarity and a truthfulness that is not found many other places in the media. Clarion Project would be another good place to look, but Gatestone Institute. They had an article this week also about how in the Palestinian areas, the Palestinians are going around and erasing the presence of Christians. They're tearing down crosses. There was an 1800-year-old Byzantine church that they destroyed or defaced so that you couldn't tell it was a Byzantine church. And this is going on in the Palestinian areas. It's not the Jewish state of Israel that's doing this. It's the Palestinian Muslim Arabs that are doing this. But of course, Israel's the problem. And Gatestone Institute cites this study, what British Muslims really think. It's a 615-page survey. You can download it. It comes from ICM Unlimited. And they did a very extensive survey last year of Muslims in Britain. And they have 615 pages of graphs and tables like this to support their data. listen to some of their findings. More than 100,000 British Muslims sympathize with suicide bombers and people who commit other terrorist acts. Moreover, only 1 in 3 British Muslims, 34%, would contact the police if they believed that somebody close to them had become involved with jihadists. It's exactly what happened with the Paris mastermind in Belgium. The Muslim population of Britain has surpassed 3.5 million in 2015 to become around 5.5% of the overall population, according to figures extrapolated from a recent study on the growth of the Muslim population in Europe. In real terms, Britain has the third largest Muslim population in the European Union after France, then Germany. 23% of British Muslims said Islamic Sharia law should replace British laws in areas with large Muslim populations. Almost a third, 31% of British Muslims think polygamy should be legalized. Among 18 to 24-year-olds, 35% think it is acceptable to have more than one wife. So there is a major problem in Europe with this Islamic immigration that's taken place. Europe is gone. I may have a couple slides down here. I'm not sure if I did them or not. I don't think I have anymore. So there's some major problems with what's going on in Europe, and they don't know how to deal with it. And their suggestion that Europe is effectively, it's over with because of what they've done and what they've allowed. And that has some very interesting prophetic implications depending on your view of where this final beast empire arises out of. If you believe it's Eurocentric, I think there's some issues with that right now. Other people say, well, no, the fact that Europe's in really bad trouble now means that a great superpower is going to rise out of the ashes of what's left of Europe. So we'll just have to see how that plays out. Everybody's got their own view. It's one of the views of how that plays out in the end times. Now, earlier this week, I'll finish up with this and then some passages. Netanyahu revealed some information that there have been multiple airstrikes that Israel has undertaken in Syria to prevent Hezbollah from getting weapons. The exact number of the strikes is not known, but obviously Israel has informed Russia that they're going to make strikes. They're not going to allow Hezbollah to get certain types of weapons. They already have tens of thousands of rockets and missiles that they can fire at Israel, but there's certain technology that they don't have yet, and Israel's doing everything in its power to prevent that from happening. So that's a very hot area there up in Lebanon, the Golan Heights, the Syrian part and the Lebanese part of the border up there around the Golan Heights. What Israel did, though, was they flew a helicopter of their cabinet up to the Golan Heights. It was either Friday or yesterday. And up there, Netanyahu declared, Golan will be forever ours. And there's a picture of the cabinet meeting up on the Golan Heights. Many of you have been up to those overlook areas. It really is one of the most strategic areas on the planet. Netanyahu, of course, there he is at the overlook. And that's my slide about many large-scale Hamas terrorist plots have been foiled, particularly up in that area around the Golan Heights. Here's Netanyahu overlooking with one of the soldiers up there. Place that, again, we've been to a couple times, and I know a number of you others. Now, there's no audio on this slide because it's Hebrew, and so I'm going to do an attempt to read a little bit about what Netanyahu is saying. We are here in the Golan Heights. This is the first time that the Israeli government formal meetings in the Golan Heights, that the Israeli government has had formal meetings in the Golan Heights in 49 years. The Golan Heights have been under Israeli rule. I sound like I'm speaking Hebrew. The Golan was an integral part of the land of Israel in ancient times, as evidenced by the dozens of ancient synagogues around us. And the Golan Heights is an integral part of Israel in modern times. He goes on to say, it's a great speech. You can find it online. You can find the transcript online. I want to see if I can find here. Essentially, to paraphrase what he says is, it's better that Israel's in charge here than anybody else, because now it's an area where it's peaceful, it's serene, it's pastoral, it's very important. Netanyahu said this during his speech: I chose to hold this festive meeting in the Golan Heights in order to convey a clear message. The Golan Heights will always remain under Israeli control. Israel will never withdraw from the Golan Heights. A deputy defense minister said after listening to Netanyahu's Golan Heights speech that could be a preemptive step towards full Israeli law being applied in Judea and Samaria. Now, this is an interesting thing. We know that there are things that are predicted to happen in the end times up there on the mountains of northern Israel that would include this. We know that Russia has a significant presence there still, as this article says, just yesterday in the New York Times. Even though Russia has said that they're withdrawing or they're not that active, they really are still very active in Syria. I'm going to try to talk about this a little bit more in the future, but there's a very important passage that deals with Israel, the land of Israel in the end times. And it's a passage that many people interpret as more history than future. And that's Daniel chapter 11. A lot of commentaries will say that everything in Daniel chapter 11, everything from verse 1 up through about verse 35 is, it was prophecy when Daniel wrote it, but it came true at the time of the Maccabees and Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth. As I have studied this more and more, my view is that Daniel 11 is a prophecy about the future. You have to do a little bit of shoehorning to get the story of the Maccabees and Antiochus Epiphanes and what happened there led to the festival of Hanukkah, what happened in the temple during that time. It's hard to get the historical record fit into what Daniel prophesied. So my view is that is a prophecy of the future. Now, there are elements of what happened during the time of the Maccabees and Antiochus Epiphanes that fit what Daniel wrote, but by and large, I believe that the best way to look at that passage is as a future passage. And what it lays out is it lays out the career of the Antichrist. It is a very important passage. When the disciples came to Jesus on the Mount of Olives and asked him about what's the sign of your coming and of the end of the age, the one passage that Jesus referred to was Daniel chapter 11 and 12. Well, actually 9, 11, and 12. And he said, you want to understand, go read Daniel. So I think that if we want to understand what's going to happen in the career of this person called the Antichrist, we need to go and look at what Daniel chapter 11 says. So I'll just read a little bit of that this morning, and then we'll quit, mainly because my voice is about shot. In chapter 11 of Daniel, verse 21, it talks about this person who will rise, and in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably. And this is, you can see how this ties into other passages about the rise of the Antichrist. He will make a covenant with the many for 1 week. through, I think in Revelation, it talks about the white horse rider coming in, and through peace he will destroy many. I personally think that the white horse is an indicator of the rise of the Antichrist. He doesn't come in full-blown, in charge, running everything in the world. He comes in peaceably and obtains the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arms of the flood shall they be overflown before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. Verse 23. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully. For he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. He shall be enter peaceably, even upon the fattest places of the province. And he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers, and he shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches. Yea, he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. And it goes on, verse 25, and he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south. Most people say that's Egypt. I agree with that. With a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. And then when we get into verse 27, it really gives the sort of the central core thing that this guy is about. What is it that really causes this guy to rise to power? What is it that he really wants? What is it that he really opposes? Because we know at some point he will be possessed by Satan during that 70th week, and he will do Satan's bidding. So what is it that Satan is really against? And you find this in verse 27. And both of these kings' hearts shall do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Then he shall return into his land with great riches. And here's the key to all of this. And his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. So what we see is that what is really driving this guy is he is against the Jewish people and Israel. That is a perfect picture of the way the world is set up now. It is a constant refrain that I see in the news now of attacks on the Jewish state of Israel and the Jewish people. It happens over and over and over again. And it's something that we should expect to continue. We should expect it to get worse. And there is great hope in the whole process, but we have to be honest, there is a lot of trouble ahead for that area of the world and for the state of Israel. I wish it was not so, but everything I see in the scripture says that it is. To bring those people, to bring them to the point where they will turn back to God and Jesus Christ. So keep that in mind. You might want to read Daniel 11 and 12. It's a great passage, but read it with the understanding that it's mostly prophecy about what is yet future. And it lays out in great detail what's going to happen and the time periods that it's going to happen in. So I apologize for my voice. I'm still struggling a little bit with a sinus infection. Appreciate your prayers about this. So let's pray, and we'll take some of these topics up next week. Lord, again, thanks so much for your word. Thanks for the way you fulfill prophecy about how you said you would bring the Jewish people back to their land in the end times. And Lord, we just pray, as Daniel prayed, when he realized it was on the cusp of the prophecies about the Babylonian captivity being fulfilled, he prayed, as we should pray, that your prophecies be fulfilled precisely as you have told the prophets, and that you will be glorified through that process. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.